Welcome to the 2020 Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival, powered by Facebook. Today we're talking with Don Porter, filmmaker extraordinaire and director of John Lewis Good Trouble. Hi, Don. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's so good to have you. And thank you for such an amazing film.
I
Really
appreciate that.
touching. I thought about you this summer when the Congressman died, because I felt like you would probably, there's all kinds of people that were really wrecked, right? I mean, there's so many reasons to be wrecked by his loss. But I thought about you in particular because I know that you'd spent a lot of time with them on this film. And I was just wondering, how are you doing? And what have you been thinking? Because this has been it's been a tough road this year, 2020.
That is true. Kids. I did spend a lot of time considering with him. We filmed for over a year, and we filmed him at work. We filmed him at home in DC and in Atlanta, and then we even went to Troy with him. And then, one of the most moving things we did is we did that Montgomery to Selma pilgrimage, and then crossed the bridge, and filmed him doing that. So, the other thing is we had no idea he was ill, and I don't think he did. So we finished the movie in late November. He was diagnosed in December. So it was a real shock. I mean, I had always planned to be traveling the country with him, dancing to Pharrell and like enjoying and letting him see people enjoy. So the diagnosis was a big shock. And then knowing how serious it was, his passing was a real blow. I mean, that's the only way I can think to describe it. I was able to show him the movie.
Oh, great.
And so I was in San Francisco. I flew to DC, to his DC house, and where he was receiving treatment. And it was Valentine's Day, so February 2020, and it seems like such a lifetime ago. And I just flipped open my laptop and sat next to him, and we watched it together in his very cozy, pretty Washington, D.C. little cozy townhouse near the Capitol. And he just kept saying, "It's so powerful," and I said, "Mr. Lewis, your life is powerful." And then we just visited, just like good old we didn't have to be anywhere, we didn't have to do anything. So it was just such a pleasant little bubble. Like for that moment in time, like there weren't a bunch of problems. It was just really nice.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I didn't know how many problems there would be. And then, so that was the last time I saw him.
No.
So
I have to say,
yeah.
You reminded me that one of the things I love about the film, there's a lot I love, and I just watched it again this afternoon, actually. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting, just strategically, is you having him look at some of the footage. It's really quite beautiful, but I wonder how that came about.
Yeah. Like one of the challenges whenever you have any subject is figuring out what is the place that you want to place them in so that they can access memory, and they can be comfortable and really dig into stories.
Right.
And so for Mr. Lewis, what became clear over the time filming is he was so busy. In the house, he would be interrupted like every 15 minutes to go walk and vote. And then at home, he literally was like, he was worried about his house being messy. And
oh yeah, I thought that was hilarious.
It was lit, this junky house. He was anxious about it. So we were at Bryan Stevenson's beautiful museum, Civil Rights Museum in Alabama. And we were there with Mr. Lewis. We were following him with cameras, not in the museum, but on that trip. And he's in the museum, and he's watching a video installation of footage of him. And we're all around him, and like people are milling around, and there's this teenager next to him, like on a school trip. Can you imagine being on a school trip and John Lewis is next to you watching footage of
No,
John
I'm
Lewis?
kind of jealous.
Right? So I'm just observing. Like a lot of my job is just to watch. And so, watching, he turns to this kid next to him and he says, "Sometimes I can't believe that's me." And then he starts telling a story that I'd never heard before about what he was seeing. And I just thought, that's what I should do. I need to make him like his own archival sequence to respond to and put him in a quiet place so he can really focus without interruption. So we asked, his staff made him available for like a whole afternoon for several hours. And we rented a stage in Washington, constructed 3 large screens, and my editor, Jessica, and I made sections for him to watch and then speak to. And it really did the trick because he was able to just sink into the archive. And then we have that great moment where he says, "I'm seeing things I've never seen before."
Right.
And so, that was huge. And I think that he's certainly talking about particular footage, but I think he's also talking about all of it, because he was able to watch an hour of just footage of his life.
Right.
Like what a gift to do that, right? Like, so I think he was seeing a little bit of what we all see.
That archival footage, you have a lot of really beautiful, powerful images from the civil rights movement and from his time, from Mr. Lewis's time, and MLK, but what I think is really interesting is that it must be a challenge for a filmmaker, first of all, to find footage you haven't seen, and I think there was some, so I'd love to hear what it was, because that's so amazing. But there's also that part where I trust you to contextualize that differently, to use it differently, because we're getting to this point where I feel like we see a lot of that stuff, and it's not. I'm ambivalent about the notions of post-traumatic slave syndrome in a certain way, but I am not ambivalent about the part where, first of all, we are watching what are basically snuff films on television of Black men and Black women being killed by the police. And then on top of it, we have these other films that used to really, the whole world is watching. They were incredibly powerful. They really did probably move us forward dramatically.
Yeah.
But I often feel like they're sort of now potentially traumatic. So I trust Black filmmakers to know better than others how to leverage that, to show us that, to put it in a different context, so that it doesn't always feel just like we're just sort of remembering like how crappy this has been, how brutal it was, how crazy violent these people can be, kind of thing.
And becoming even worse, becoming numb to it.
Right.
So there's almost no winning. It's either you're watching this insane brutality and the horror of it is overwhelming and re-traumatizing, or you've seen it so much that you are like, "Oh yeah, that happened." So to that exact point, that was a major concern of mine. And on 2 levels, the archive in this film, I kind of came at it from with 2 objectives. One was to back us up from that moment on the bridge, because that's all we ever see.
Right.
And to make the point that John Lewis didn't just show up on a bridge. He studied, he trained, and so did all those other young people.
Love that.
For months and months. And, when I think about deconstructing racism, I think about language. And if we only describe John Lewis and the other civil rights activists in terms of their bravery, which they undoubtedly were, instead of their intelligence and their strategy, we don't actually give them their full humanity and their full power, because what they did was a strategic genius. Those 19 and 20-year-olds, they were certainly following in the footsteps of the Nashville, adults who had laid the groundwork for their actions, but it was the teenagers who took it over the top. And it was the teenagers who met for months in a church basement studying nonviolence, determining what to wear. They're always all dressed up. Determining the scene that the archive that gets me and this I think is one of the things Mr. Lewis had not seen before, is there's footage when they're in a courtroom being arrested, and the narrator says they were given the choice between jail and posting bail, and then he says they each chose jail. So that was a strategy,
Right.
to make a bigger impact,
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm.
also to keep each other alive. So there was so much happening, so much intentional thought that went into those moments that we see, that I wanted to back us up to appreciate all that went into that moment when he makes that decision to be in the front of the line and to keep marching forward. So that, and then, the other thing is, a lot of the drama of that moment is actually in the lead up to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you're in a scary movie and
Right.
you hear the sound, that's sometimes more frightening than the actual monster, right? And so for me, it was the slow march, and that's why we did the drums,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Tamar Kali's beautiful score,
It is quite
to give you that sense of impending dread. And then you really appreciate how brave they had to be when you slow that moment down, so that there is the screaming and like the things that are familiar. Because we actually tried not showing it. I tried snapping it
uh-huh.
in moments. It wasn't quite as evocative as raising the stakes and letting that explosive moment happen. But then if you notice, we froze it.
Right.
So, and
Yeah.
then the music take us out. So I hoped that the effect would not be this voyeuristic, absorption of violence. And once again, seeing that wasn't the point. The point was more in the preparation and the bravery of the
Right,
moment.
right. And you make, I think that's a great point. And you also have so contextualize it within his like activism in a way, I mean, which I think really does then lead new young reviewers who haven't, watched all of Eyes on the Prize, because I sometimes I'm like so like jaded, right? It's like, oh, I've
Oh,
seen.
right.
It's like, wait a minute, not everyone has, and those are really, and Eyes on the Prize is amazing. So I'm not sort of taking anything away from it.
No,
I mean,
nothing.
it's
I mean,
extraordinary, but that's like we've seen a lot, and
yeah.
other people haven't in the same way. But to put it within the context, especially at this moment of activism, of social justice work, I love the extended scenes, and of them in that basement doing that role playing, and because it was crazy, and there's like release, but there's also like really it's very serious, and I remember I've seen elsewhere where it's like it's sort of hard to role play and use the words of like those racists. I mean sometimes I think that's why there were like Black folks doing it as well,
Yeah.
because these like young white kids who were like completely
Didn't want to do it.
in the movement, they didn't want to say that. And it was really, it's like, but you kind of have to, because
this is what's going to happen.
We got to like be ready for this.
Yeah, and if you look at John Lewis in those, he can't even bring himself, even in role playing, to hit anybody.
Right.
It's so him. It's so deep. He had accepted nonviolence, and even in play, he's kind of like, yeah, like he's just in the background clapping. Like he doesn't actually do the thing. You see, like, C.T. Vivian is in there, and he's like a bunch of, you don't see, and when you looked, I was like, does he? And this is a person who was deeply in that movement.
Right.
And I think it says something actually to his spirit, that he just literally could not bring himself. It's not in him. That's not him.
It is really quite extraordinary. I think you really get at that in some way. And I think the longevity, the like having him around for so long, even though it's this crappy year, to have him taken away, it's amazing the kind of grace he has, I think. And it's interesting too, because one of my questions, I was writing it down today, was just like, well, what did you learn about peace? Because I actually think he's such a representative of that. He had said something about it in the film, and I was just, and I think there's that moment where one of the freshmen at the time, Congressman, was just like, we were thinking we wanted to stand out and boo, and he's like, we don't do it.
Diana Presley.
Presley.
That's not how we do this.
And I just think, that is so interesting, and it's great to have different voices anyway. But what did you learn about peace from him, do you think?
something very important that I think about almost daily, which is that peace is active. I think there's a misunderstanding that it is a passive behavior, but it takes a lot of energy, positive energy, to choose to stay peaceful. And that it is not easy at all. It's kind of like a mindful meditation. There's a line Bernard Lafayette has, and when he says, we had changed, and so it was over. There was no going back.
That's a great line.
Once they accepted that this was the way forward, it's like I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's like you've seen God, and you can't then go back to a place when you were not without that feeling, that emotion. And then he says, and I love this too, we kept giving them the opportunity to change. And what a positive way to think about what they were doing is, and you see in that statement some optimism, even in everything that they are going through. There is the hope that maybe somebody's going to crack, somebody's going to you know? Right. And they kept coming at that with that hope. And I don't think that was naive. I think that was like remarkable. And I think it speaks to something that Mr. Lewis had his entire life, which is he really had a deep optimism and faith in humanity. And he believed if given the opportunity to be better, most people would be better. And I think that is a hard thing right now, when we are looking at stories. The stories that are rising to the top of our consciousness are more often about the people who violate the social compact than the people who are adhering to it. And I think that's why it was so powerful to see people filling the streets after George Floyd's murder, not only in all 50 states, but around the world. Yeah, it was people filling into the streets. And that I am so grateful that Mr. Lewis got to see that, because I know that was a very that actually brought him like some solace and comfort when he was really, at the end of his life.
That's so well said. And yes, thank goodness. I think I was surprised that you had trained as a lawyer. And
guilty.
And well, would you like? Do you want to go to jail, or would you like to pay $50 a pay? You would choose jail.
Yeah, I had to pay the $50. We would still be in the back of the bus if it was.
Oh no,
I'm not brave.
That's so funny. But you made the shift to film. But interestingly enough, it kind of feels in line with whatever had, at least to me, because Gideon's Army was about public defenders. Yeah. It's like there's just a list of things that sort of. So could you walk us through sort of what changed for you that you decided to be a filmmaker, and also I love it. I love it. I think it sort of makes a kind of perfect sense.
I was not an unhappy lawyer. I was perfectly fine. I had a good job. I had people who respected me. I was kind of on the path to partner. And to tell you the truth, what happened is my best friend at the time passed away in her 30s from ovarian cancer. And I thought it was like this giant, first of all, it was, she was in the office next to me. We had lunch together every day for almost 5 years. Every day that one of us did not have another plan, we would have lunch together. We saw each other on the weekend. We were very close. And when she died, it was like this realization, something that Mr. Lewis says, you only pass this way once. And so another thing he would say to me all the time is he liked to have an executive session with himself. Nice. And say, is this all there is? Is it enough to have direct deposit and nice pens? Or is there something more I want out of life and that I can give back to it? And so I promised myself in that, after I was in a funk for quite a bit after she passed, quite a long time. And then So she passed away in January, and I said to myself, the next thing that puts me out of my comfort zone, but feels like it would be exciting, I'm going to say yes to, no matter what. And I just said, I'm going to say yes. And then a partner at my law firm called. He had recently left and went to work for ABC in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, do you want to come? Do you want to leave Washington, D.C., and you're newly married, first house you're so happy in with all your friends and your parents and da, da, da. And I was like, yes, I want to leave. And so it was not that easy, but we did do it. And that kind of set me closer. I was like, okay, I was always like into journalism. I represented newspapers. I was, I wrote for the student newspaper. Like I loved all those things. And then I did a project for the news division. And then they made me an offer to work doing news ethics standards and practices. Mm-hmm. And the way that my boss did that job, or the way she organized it, was that we were reviewing news footage for not what can you do legally, but what should you do as a journalist? Like what is journalistically appropriate?
Right.
And so as a result, I spent a lot of times watching cuts and staying in edit rooms and seeing how the sausage is made and really pushing reporters to think about, were we doing things ethically? She was really prescient. I mean, in thinking, mm-hmm. if people lose their faith in the media, we are lost. And this was her, designing the job. So I spent a long time doing that. I was at ABC for 7.5 years. And then I got a job at A&E Television, started doing the same function I had done at ABC, but at a cable network. But in all of that time, I was like, I think I could do this. Like, why can't I do this? What's so special about it? And then the last piece of it was it coincided with the rise of cable television reality TV. Mm-hmm. And so I had gone to thinking that I was going to be doing one kind of work, working like with History Channel. And all of a sudden it was like white Proud Boys and beards. And I was like, what am I doing here? This mm-hmm. isn't the kind of content that I mm-hmm. want to be part of. So I then decided I was going to make a film. And I convinced them to let me be part-time, and I just networked. I went to conferences. I went to film festivals. I didn't have a film. I just went to all these things. I was a lawyer about it. I was like, study the field and find out who funds and how much it costs and what people think. And so I did that for a year before I had an idea. And then, there's a lot of benefits to coming to a second career. You have a big network who you can tap into once you realize, this person can educate me. So I had a lot of informational meetings. And then there was a Black woman who had been a young lawyer with me in DC, and we had volunteered. We were like lawyers who volunteered as people who had gotten jobs at firms. We were part of a group that would go back and speak to Black law students about what they needed to do to get jobs and blah, 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 blah. Right. And so I knew her from there. And then she went to the Ford Foundation. And I was in like a mommy exercise class with some friends. And they were like, Kirsten Livingston. I would tell everybody that I met, I'd be like, hi, I'm really interested in filmmaking. I would tell everybody. So everybody knew. Uh-huh. So then my friends in mommy exercise class were like, you should talk to her. She funds movies. And I was like, okay. So I went to talk to her, and I said, I have this idea for a movie. And she said, I don't think we fund that, but are you interested in any of my grantees? And I was like, I'm interested in those public defenders. And she said, well, go bring some tape back and then let's talk. So that's what happened. So I went on my vacation. I spent my own money to hire somebody to film. We got some tape. It took a really long time because I had no editor. I had these tapes. I would carry them around in my bag. But at my day job, I would beg the editors to help me look at the footage. Uh-huh. So it took months to get this done. Right. And then I finally went back, and to your point about eyes on the prize. So I had been talking with her, And she was like, yeah, this is good. I like it. I like it. She didn't know anything about anything either. She was brand new. We were just like,
but she liked it.
but she liked it. So she said, there's just one last step. You need to show the film person. And I was like, shoot. I was like, up until now, this is working. We speak each other's language. Like, she likes it. Da, da, da. And so I was like, who's that? And she says, it's Orlando Bagwell. So Orlando Bagwell is one of the producers of Eyes on the Prize. So I thought, the jig is up.
I will be.
I cannot fake my way through this with the man who did Eyes on the Prize. So I went in and I was sweating, and I did the worst pitch I have ever done. In fact, I brought this with me. I have this DVD I brought, and I got there and Orlando was there. I've never been so nervous in my life. And because I really cared about this at this point. Like, I was like, I want to do this. I know I can do this. And I was like, here. I like put the DVD in I was like sweat. It was a mess. And he's such a kind person. And he said, tell me about these people, these lawyers. And I was like, oh, well, that I can do. And I went on, and he's like, and what are you attracted to them? And and how did you see? And like, we just started talking. He made it so I could just talk.
Oh, that's great.
And then he said, how much do you need? And I was like, I had no idea how much I needed. Right. So I go, $50,000. He was like, we're going to give you 200 and you should make this movie.
That's so adorable. That's such a great story. I love that story. But I love that he had that like sort of Austin Powers moment where you're like, $2 million. I'm like, sure, right? Okay, 50,000. We're gonna give you a little more.
It was like the most money I could think of.
I know. You might actually get it. That is so fantastic.
And then, he didn't just give money; he gave his time. Like, he let me come in and show him, footage and talk it through. He wasn't like, cut a minute here. He was like, I don't understand what's happening here, or this or that. And that, like, to be in the presence of somebody,
become better.
That's right.
I mean, it has to be that way. I mean, I think that it's such a great, the other reason it's such a great story is because it reminds us of how things actually get made.
That's right.
Things that we care about, as opposed to like some there's like the super, you're not presenting this as like, I knew exactly what I was doing from day one, and this is how I did it. And it's like, I call hogwash, because it's so, film is super collaborative.
That's
even
right.
when it's a little bit of
you need all those combinations of, you have to put yourself in a place to become lucky, right? Mm-hmm. And you kind of have to have a thick skin, but you also have to like understand what you don't know. Like, I wasn't he knew I wasn't trying to pretend that I knew what I was doing. I just knew I had a good story and I had good characters, and like, they were willing to, climb on board that effort.
Right. So one of the questions I have is, especially with documentary, perhaps, I think this works with fiction films as well, but with documentary, I think it does too, which is, you had these films before. What are the things that you learned sort of that led to the sort of strategies you employed for Good Trouble? What were the lessons? What were the sort of like, we won't do that again kind of moments, or maybe there weren't any I won't do that kind of moments again?
No, for Good Trouble, it wasn't so much I won't do that again. It was understanding that with a very famous icon of a person, mm-hmm. that actually sometimes the thing they crave the most is being treated like a person and not a postage stamp.
Right.
So I think I was able to bring my whole self to the relationship. But also myself is also a little Black girl who went to church with her grandmother, who, some people would say like, John, I would no more call Mr. Lewis John than I would walk into a firestorm. Like, that is not how you treat elders, like,
Right.
just as people. It doesn't matter if you are a congressman or the housekeeping. Like, you give people respect because of their humanity. And so very quickly, I think he just recognized that I wasn't being obsequious. I wasn't like, there wasn't any gotcha. I just want to spend time with him. I just
Right.
wanted
Right.
to like let him do his thing. And he's very comfortable doing his thing.
I think so. I do think I remember when that dance went viral, and it really was like one of those things. I have like a little list of stuff I go to on YouTube that makes me happy, and that's one of them. Right? It's just like, oh, I am having a day. Wait a minute, I know what I can look at to like sort of reset. It's just adorable. So let's. I mean, because I think that some people will know, and this will be the introduction for some people to your work. So tell us a little bit about like one thing that you're particularly proud of in each of the films that led up to this. So with Gideon's Army, what did you?
I went into that thinking those young people just blew my mind. That I went into it with a lawyer with a lot of Northeastern fancy school bias.
Mhm.
And what they taught me, and I think they taught so many other people, is that that's full of shit. That these young lawyers were some of the finest lawyers of any I had ever seen, of any. They were just spectacular. And it was the fact that they were joyful lawyers, even in their tough times,
Mhm.
was like so eye-opening to me. So for me to not treat them, so many films treat the African American protagonists as almost like objects to be viewed in like their natural habitat,
Right.
instead of coming at them respectfully and like, you know, I don't know. I'm really proud that I think I showed really who they were
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what they were facing, and I feel like I accessed emotion in that movie, like emotion they felt, that I felt, that the audience feels. I'm particularly proud in that movie of the giving a voice to an accused young man. And there's a scene that's like one of my favorites is we interviewed his mother, and I don't know if you have children. I have children, but I'm like, I was like, I will not show this kid in a jumpsuit. Like, he's going to be
Mm.
in clothes, in his home, and a person. And
Right.
and the thing that like always gets people is like, I was like, how do you get his mother to like talk about him? And I was like, we were looking through the book, and I was like, oh, tell me about these pictures. And she's like, DeMontes was a very good baby. And every parent or aunt or anyone around children knows, you talk about babies like they're a good baby, they eat, they sleep, right?
Right.
That's universal. Every mother, no matter what your race is, can relate to that statement, either like, oh, he was so difficult, he didn't sleep, or he was such a good baby.
He's such a good baby because I got some sleep.
Right, right. And then all of a sudden you're thinking about him as a baby.
Right.
Thinking you fill in all the details of mothering. You fill in, I looked over this. You don't even have to say it. I looked over him at night. When he had a cold, I worried he couldn't breathe. You fill it all in,
Right.
and all of a sudden he's a person, not a defendant.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when you get to the end of that movie, you're like, what's going to happen to this person who was a very good baby?
Yeah, that's
So
lovely.
I'm really proud of that in that film. Um, I think in Trapped, I'm just really happy to have found Dr. Parker
Right.
and to put a bit of a human face on a Supreme Court case and show what it was like. I mean, a lot of films, you know, intentionally, because I'm seeking it out, they lift up Black people,
Right.
real Black people,
Hmm.
not just like poverty porn situations.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I say that because it's vitally important to show what poverty looks like, but that's not our full story. Our full
Right.
story is much fuller.
Absolutely.
and also includes power in places where you won't expect it. And
Mm-hmm.
so without being like Pollyanna about it, I like to also show the people's power. So
Right. So it's really interesting to have that in your sort of, quiver, and then have this, and what you just said about Mr. Lewis is part of what you think connected you, is just like that you also treated him like a person as opposed to an icon. It's really interesting. I mean, it's funny because people will say John, and sort of it sounds, it's just feels uncomfortable, by the way, but there's this other part where, which I think is people trying to have that, like, sort of that connection. But it is really interesting to see the moments where, I mean, the going back to Troy was one of those moments where it was very dear, and talking to his sibling. I mean, because siblings are a very special thing. And the other thing is his son goes, okay, what's it like to like travel with him through airports? Tedious. I love it because that's so human, right? It's like, oh, it's like, we're never going to get through here. We're never going to get to like the mill. We're never going to get to this. We're never going to get to that, because everyone wants to, like, thank him, shake his hand, get a little selfie, all that stuff. So it's interesting to kind of almost flip it from raising up
yeah,
people that we think of as kind of, normal, regular folk in some way, and recognizing and revealing their power in,
right.
in your work, and then doing this other thing, which is not taking away,
That's really true.
his,
Oh, I like that. I'm gonna steal that.
it's yours. Well, it's a reaction to what you do. So it's like, it basically is yours.
But the sibling part too was really. I was just so glad we had the opportunity to do that, because your siblings do know you in an unvarnished way. You know, they know your version of your origin story, and then they were there.
Yes.
So, but I think for Mr. Lewis, I don't know that he had very often heard them talk about their fears for him. And if
Right.
you look at like that scene again, you'll see his older brother is like still wiping away a tear at the thought of how worried they were for him.
Wow.
He grew up in the time of Emmett Till, when
Yeah.
you just looked wrong or alleged to have looked wrong on a white person, it could kill you. And so for him to do what he did, as proud as his siblings were, they were crowded around a radio, hoping to hear his name in a good way, and hoping not to hear his name in the newspaper as somebody shot or beaten or killed.
Right.
That was a very stressful time for their family. And yet I didn't hear anyone say they told him not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like but they engaged in that suffering too. And he kind of had to live with the fact that to pursue his dreams, he was causing pain for his family.
Right.
But I love the fact that, as far as I know, nobody ever said, come home, stop it.
No, it doesn't look like it.
And what a sacrifice, right? For all the rest of us.
Absolutely. He wouldn't have listened, you get the sense.
Yeah, maybe there was that.
Right. And there could be bitterness, but instead I think there's just like, they carried that with them. You're right.
Yeah.
His
And they're
vulnerability.
still doing that. They're immensely proud of him. Um, and, they call him Robert. They're proud of Robert.
Oh, it's adorable.
Yeah.
I love the scene where he has the sort of staff reunion. He starts that chicken story again, which is hilarious because it is a good story and he knows how to tell it, and he even sort of cuts himself off. But I saw that woman sort of like, and they don't say now amen or whatever. It's like, that is so hilarious. It's just very charming because it's very human. You made some interesting choices. What dictated who you wanted to talk to that's sort of in Congress right now? You got all those like freshmen who are sort of engaged, and then like a different generation, they're young. And I wonder, that seemed very important.
It was important to me. I could have filled hours with people wanting to say nice things
Right.
about John Lewis. But what I really wanted to do was both speak to his contemporaries, because it's one thing to hear somebody say, wow, look at all the things he did. It's another thing for Jim Clyburn or Elijah Cummings, who also were in those marches and in those spaces. When Jim Clyburn says John Lewis is the bravest person I've ever met,
That says something.
that says something. And you know, Congressman Cummings was the first interview we did. And he was in the middle of all kinds of stuff that day. We were in Congress, and we didn't know he was sick. And he made his way over, like, with some effort, physical. His leg was hurting him that day. You could tell it was so important for him to say what he wanted to say, you know. And the line that, like, just kills me is when he tells the story, which is funny, about, I've gotten a lot of pictures taken with and I said, Mr. Cummings, are you saying that you impersonate John Lewis? And he just gave this big laugh. Up until then, he had been very earnest. He gave this big laugh. And, like, that's the moment you want as a director, when somebody connects with you and they're funny and they take the bait and they run with it. And he was like, he was just a great storyteller. So he says, like, you know, I don't want to embarrass the parents. So I've had a lot of pictures taken with John Lewis. But then he caps it by saying, I'm happy to be mistaken for a great man. And we know that he was a great man. So, like, there was that. I really wanted those contemporary stories. I love Jim Clampard saying, I was never as nonviolent as John.
Yeah.
I can call him John. They are the same age. So, and then, you know, for the freshmen, like, I wanted people to remember that John Lewis really identifies with them. He has always been the knocking on the door, rabble rouser. That's what he loves. He, like, you know, that's where he comes from. Those are his people. And so for them to say that they, you know, were able to, so he knows what it's like to make that transition from activist to Congress.
Right.
I think he really did help them become more effective.
Great, because we want a kind of pragmatism. I mean, and I feel like you got to get stuff done. I mean,
that's right.
And that gig, you have to get stuff done, and it's a different kind of public service. And I think it's really interesting that he models that in a way, and that he has so much respect for doing it. Right? It's like, you know, the way you sort of talked about getting to see, like, what how the sausage was made as a film, you know, a nascent filmmaker, looking at sort of how things were edited and stuff. I just think that he would be a great mentor and sort of role model, but not in that sort of, you know, icon. I mean, because his legislative assistant said, or head says that, which is just like, you know, lots of people want to look at him as just the icon, the civil rights icon. But this is a guy that, like, was getting things done, was writing new laws. I mean, all that stuff. Right. And I love that of course you would see, I think there really is, like, this through line of, you know, lawyer becomes really, really good documentary filmmaker and, like, sort of makes that stuff pop in a different way. So it's, you know,
I think also there are very few people who could understand part of making that transition from outsider to in the halls of power is living with yourself now that you're inside, because you get so used to petitioning and banging on the door for change that you feel like you're betraying if you compromise.
Right.
And I think he understood. He wanted to model that compromise was change, that was progress, and that don't be afraid of the incremental. You know, John Lewis introduced the legislation to get the African American Museum on the Mall for like 16 years. Talk about stubborn. He was going to introduce that until it happened. And George Bush who signed it, right?
Yeah, right. I know. So, actually, that's one of the things I loved the first time I saw the film. I still love it. I think it's amazing that you did it, and it creates an extra amount of respect for me. It's trust in you as a filmmaker, because all this stuff, right? I mean, Mr. Lewis is so compelling as a figure. He's so, like, kind of beautiful in that grace-filled way. I mean, there's so much. But you show the stuff that happened with Julian Bond, and it's deep. Like, it's so deep, because I grew up, my family, like, Southern poverty. It's like Julian Bond is kind of like, you know, another, like, sort of household.
That's right. Icon.
And it was just like, oh, I don't think that necessarily was one of John.
No one talks.
Moments.
No one talks about it now. It happened, and, you know, and like, to have Bryant Gumbel
Oh, I know, like when he was
human
5.
to each other and have that discomfort. And I think this is also part of giving Black people their full humanity
Right.
is you can make mistakes, you can do things that are distasteful, and you can still be good. But also it involves the audience in it. Because as mean as that was, first of all, it's kind of quaint in today's, compared to today's political scandals. It was a huge political scandal, but it says a number of things. Number one is Black people weren't all aligned, right? There were struggles, even people who were aligned policy-wise. Number two, John Lewis is a competitor. He wanted to win.
That's
And
right.
he had ambition. He is not this saintly man. He had ambition, and for a reason. But number three, we're involved in it because we're sitting here celebrating all his accomplishments. And what does politics force you to do? Would we want him to make a different choice if he wouldn't have won? It just makes you think about all those things.
Right, right. And I love that. And I
Be
don't
like
think
there's
that,
a linear, easy, Cinderella story that doesn't allow you to wrestle with any little, and like, so before I like accepted the job, I was like, I had to admit to myself I was not going to be the person to bring John Lewis down. So I did like opposition research. I was like, what are the things that like, I don't want to be accused of pulling punches or whatever. And the thing that came up was this like, oh, this Julian Bond thing is really interesting. And then when we found that archive, it was like, this is really good.
it's really good. It's completely interesting. And them, they're both of them sitting there and it's like, well, will you get, and Julian Bond, it's just, it's kind of amazing. I loved it. But I also honestly think it made me, first of all, it was noticeable to me in the context of movies that feel, films that feel like they get a little hagiographic in a way, like you just can't help yourself and you start to feel like, why do it that way? And it's just like that you did that and you went there and it was extended. It wasn't sort of glossed over, but it was really compelling about what politics can be and how he got. I mean, it's just interesting. And it didn't change, I love him just as much.
I love him just as much. We can take it.
We can.
like this is, I don't know.
Anyway.
You know what I mean.
Well, we have used a tremendous amount of your time, but I don't want to let you off quite yet without talking about your latest film. You were just in Toronto. Well, were you in Toronto? I realize I now have no idea.
I know.
Festivals are like.
I always feel like everybody else is together and I'm the only one still at home. Like,
no, I think that basically a lot of us are still at home, but it's starting to feel like it's like, were you at that party? It's like, no, I did that. But congratulations that you had, that you premiered a new film at that. So this was at John Lewis. Good Trouble was at Tribeca. In virtual world, I take it, and the one about Pete D'Souza and so
called The Way I See It,
and it's about to get shown, right? I mean, it's about to sort of go on.
Yeah, it'll be. It is in theaters now.
Okay.
Like sputtering along wherever people are going to theaters.
No, it's like, who are they?
I don't know these people. I shouldn't say that.
Oh yeah, they're wonderful. God bless.
Go to the theater. It's fine. It's all safe. It will be on MSNBC. It's their first film ever for MSNBC Films. They started a brand new unit of independent documentary, and this is the first film that they are supporting. So it'll be right after Rachel Maddow, October 16. It's about President Obama's White House photographer. He was also President Reagan's White House photographer. So it is called The Way I See It. It is about what Pete saw for 8 years. He took almost 2 million photos
of the
president and his family. He was with him almost every day for 8 years, sun up to sundown. And you see, it's not a Barack Obama was perfect movie. It's about leadership. It's about humanity, and it's about the importance of that office. And so Pete was also Reagan's White House photographer. So he, has the perspective of being in 2 administrations and seeing how the job was done. And he will say he didn't always agree with Reagan and his policies, but he thought he was a decent person. And that decency actually is one of the fundamental things you need to be a president. So, decency, intelligence, a hard work ethic, and honesty.
Oh, stop. check. No, wait.
Not so much.
Not so much. Oh, we can't end on that note. We got to come
Yeah.
up with one other thing. Like how
Well,
did,
you know what I'll end on
but the
is
decency is actually not a bad note to end on. But you choose it.
yeah, is that so I feel like these two films, John Lewis and Pete Sousa movie, they speak to each other.
Right.
Because John Lewis's message was when you see something that's not right, say something. And Pete, who was always a straight journalist, like keep your opinions to yourself, a vault for 8 years, refused to do any interviews, was so upset at the current occupant of the White House that he felt like he needed to start speaking and saying, this is really serious. We have Samantha Power, former UN ambassador, saying this was a 911, and that moved Pete from silence to activism, which is what John Lewis always asked of all of us.
Right.
So
That was beautiful.
I think I love you, Lisa.
That is very sweet. Thank you for everything. Have a great journey with this. I have one little thing to say to everybody so they know where to go to watch and to watch different things at the Martha's Vineyard African American Film Festival. So everybody, please visit www.MVAAFF.com for all festival details and itineraries. And thank you for taking time with us. It really was great. It's so good to see you.
It's so
And
good.
be well, and good luck in the next month. That's right. All right.
All right. Thank you so much.